So let's move on. I'm going to have a chat now with Gavin. There's a new intellectual line of thought that is being kicked around by the Learning Council, and I met Gavin McKelvey with Identity Automation. So we're going to be talking about this new concept that's kicking around with Gavin, because I want to make sure when I talk about the structural shift of moving to hybrid and remote and incredible flexibility and having all this technology and all that other stuff, you understand that there's some rescue coming from the industry for the complexity of it all. And one of the biggest pieces that we think is going to explode in 2021 is this one. So I want to start out with just saying, what are we talking about? What is identity infused education, and why do we care? This is a new terminology. So Gavin, I'm going to have you start out. Gavin's the Chief Marketing Officer for Identity Automation, and start talking to me about, why is this important and what is it?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first off, thanks for having me, Lonnie, and great to be with you all. Looking forward to some good discussion here. Yeah, this term identity infused education is a new one, so it requires a bit of context, I think, to talk about what is it and why is it required. And I think the best place to start is not actually with the technology side, but I think especially in the last year, everyone's sort of re-examining what is the vision for the future of education and what does sort of a nirvana state look like. And it's, I imagine some of the phrases that would probably come to mind and maybe be coming to your minds right now are things like closing the achievement gap, the digital equity gap, increasing student engagement, I'll hesitate to use the term a little bit. I think it's got multiple connotations, but more personalized learning plans. And what I mean by that is things like making sure that we have grade level appropriate curriculum and culturally responsive curriculum and performance responsive curriculum, et cetera. And I'll even add on to make sure that the learning workflows are supported appropriately, that maybe even some of the administrative workflows that exist are more automated and ultimately more responsive as well. And so when we think about that vision, there are a lot of things that have to fall into place, and ultimately a lot of inhibitors that I see when I work with a variety of districts around the country. Certain things crop up as inhibitors. Number one, the availability of technology across the stack that must be in place, especially in lower economic zones. When I say the stack, I mean from internet connectivity to devices to everything that builds up to ultimately the experience that all students deserve. Another one that's very related to this topic of identity management and identity infused education is interoperability. And just for the sake of time, I won't go into a ton of detail on that. But all I mean by interoperability is the ability for systems to talk to each other so that we collectively can deliver a better experience, a learning experience to students and teachers, ultimately maximizing as much instructional time as possible. And I think that's a huge factor for all of us today. And there's been a glacial pace of progress with respect to standards. But the third inhibitor that I see that's related to the other two that doesn't get talked about a lot is the fact that digital identities aren't generally placed at the center of a district's IT strategy. And that's really the secret to, or the kernel and essence to identity management and identity infused education. What putting the digital identities at the center of an IT strategy does is it unlocks a ton of opportunities to both automate and personalize a variety of workflows. And I'll give you just one example to focus on to sort of anchor the conversation a bit. And it would be attendance tracking. So when you ground the data and processes around the identity, you can take things like attendance tracking to the next level. What we don't want is for attendance to be just about reporting. We want quick action and identification of the next step to be able to occur. So it's taking and automating more of the process to drive greater engagement and what I would call student recovery, not just attendance. And there are a ton of other examples that I could go through, but I'll just pause for a moment. So that's Lonnie, the way I would describe both the context and what identity infused education means to me.
Yeah, so I wanted to get people sort of anchored into what we're talking about here. So I shared another screen. This is the software model architecture for hybrids directed at personalized learning that the Learning Council shared yesterday. And you'll notice that in the blue box category, there's something called sovereign identity or rostering. So essentially, if I sort of define also identity infused education, what we're talking about is you normally think about rostering as like this separate list of where kids are, and then that feeds all your other systems. It's sort of flat. It's like, here's the kid, here's this courses, here's the classes. What we're talking about identity infused education is that within that identity itself, you put tags, you expand upon that student's abilities and interests and what they're good at and maybe the way they learn, their special needs. So in other words, the identity itself expands and is not totally flat. And because it's not flat, its function across all these other systems is more dynamic. And the end game that it does allows you to take more burden off your teachers, huge discussion point, and it allows you to go in the direction of truly personalized learning for that individual student, because it's that individual's identity is now sovereign, which means, in control, and it has accumulated into itself a lot more tags, so to speak. Is that am I right, Gavin? Is that like the right way to talk about it?
Yeah, I think another way to think about it is this. Hopefully everyone's familiar with a couple different processes. Rostering is a really good one that we're all familiar with. Another one is provisioning access to systems. Sometimes we call that just plain provisioning. Sometimes we call it lifecycle management, identity lifecycle management. And it's one thing to automate a specific process, but you don't really set yourself up well for innovation of automating more processes if identity management isn't at the core. So right. That regardless of which process you want to automate, you're pointing that process at a centralized set of data that represents the real people with their unique attributes, who they are within the educational system. So another example that I would reference is when you want to look at different trends in performance, student performance. One of the ways you can look at that is looking at different cohorts. Well, you can get much more power out of your data if if the data is anchored in a variety of attributes that you would want to identify as cohorts, and effectively you can constantly do longitudinal studies on performance in effectively real time when you take this approach. And I mean, I could honestly come up with a dozen use cases when this approach is taken, and it's an approach that our customers are taking there's really been kind of an awakening as we've started to work with more and more to put identity at the center of their IT strategy. It also creates a much more agile approach in terms of pivoting when unforeseen circumstances come about, as we've seen in the last year.
Yeah, and where my mind goes when we talk about this is that during the pandemic, there was a huge, enrollment loss. Kids were going off to alternatives in droves, but also the consumer markets of learning materials in the app markets the ebooks, all the subscription websites that are maybe facing to the K-12 market, so you can buy subscription licenses for all your kids, but they also sell direct to the consumer. Those exploded, right? Like there was just a massive thing. And behind that trend is this expectation that digital is wrapped around you. So for example, if you go shopping online for anything, you will get, and you go to any other site, you're getting pop-up ads, right? The internet knows you, right? It's encapsulated your identity, and it's now trying to serve you with additional information. So I always give the example, like when I was redoing my kitchen, I was shopping for kitchen sinks, and the internet knew to show me also ads for kitchen cabinets and flooring and everything else. So like the internet knew. We have a lot of systems in education that don't know each other, but that's because they don't start out with identity, right? Like wraparound of how you use the identity. We used to call that big data a lot of, but you have to start with this encapsulated thing. So what you're talking about has been a missing thinking point. It's been like, no, we got to integrate everything to work with each other, and blah, blah, blah. It's exhausting. There's like 7,000 companies in the software space alone. At the last count, there's probably 10,000 now. Like that, we haven't counted that for years. But I want to also get to this workflow issue, right? So workflow is killing teachers. Well, how are you going to manage 1,000 emails back and forth and all your chat and your dual teaching to the screen as well as the kids in front of you, and then you're building lesson plans? And right now we look at 25% of teacher time is build lesson or just find the material in the overly nested systems. Folder, subfolder, this folder, there's the link, now to get it, stick it in the lesson plan, get it out to all the kids, get the kids to do it, collect back all their assignments. And in the meantime, they're all chatting back and forth, they're sending email independently, and the parents are asking things. It's we're looking at a structural shift. And this is, I think, the core of the structural shift. So, why isn't this really happening already? Like what, like, why did we not like grok this and think of this a while ago? And I want everyone else that's on the call right now, Matt Federoff, all the other people that are on the line. I know you guys have thoughts about all this stuff, but Gavin, from your view, why wasn't this happening already?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things. One is there is a ton of opportunity to leverage. Let's call it may be big data, it may be not so big data, but it's data to solve some of these problems. And one of them I think you called out is, I call it teacher corrupt time. Time that teachers have to spend on administrative stuff that doesn't lead, it's required, but it doesn't lead to positive student outcomes, right? It doesn't maximize learning time. And if all of us stand a chance to do things that are transformational, if we can add 10% of a teacher's day to actually teaching time, that's transformational. That will absolutely help many more students. There are things that have to be in place to leverage data to do that. And the systems have to talk to each other. So, there are, frankly, too many data standards out there. There are probably 8 prominent ones that we could probably name here. It's not so important what they are. It's important that adoption has been progressing way too slow. That's number one. Number two is the fact that these systems are built with, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing, they're built with the process in mind, but not necessarily a strategy that connects all of them with the individual in mind. And that's where the digital identity comes in. So I still come back to those two sort of obstacles that historically they've been obstacles. As we reorient our minds toward the future with a more digitally transformed approach, I think there's massive opportunity to make progress in the lower level hierarchy of needs, get standards in place, base everything around the identity, and start automating processes to really unlock the potential of the learning process, because technology will never replace what teachers can provide. And they're effectively a scarce resource. So anything we can do to free up more of their time to deliver the value that they do every day, and unshackle them, if you will, I think that's certainly square in my bullseye. Where I've seen more of the focus historically is attacking what I call hair on fire problems. And I'll give a really good example is single sign-on.
Yeah.
It's been recognized for a long time that there was way too much time dealing with logins in the classroom, and that decreased the amount of instructional time in the classroom. So a solution was created. That's a hair on fire problem. We need to graduate our thinking to another level that thinks more holistically about how to solve a variety of problems with a single strategy. And that's why solving interoperability and putting the identity at the center those are two components to, I think, a better approach that unlocks a bunch of opportunity.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And when I look at where that goes, it does go all the way up to recommendations engine like the internet uses for shoppers, right? We don't really have that for teachers. So my challenge to a lot of the administrators that are on the line right now is, we're quickly maturing every school and district in America to realize that the move to digital was not augmentation of existing structure. It is a structural shift. And if you love teachers and you love the human side of the teaching equation, you have to think now with, let's not just augment and keep giving them more work. Let's design the way we structure technology to elevate the human quality rather than just shove more on the humans that now they have to do digitally. Let's figure out how we take off the work and do it digitally, and then we elevate their humanity. And it's Achieve, which was just talking just before you, that's really what they've done with their technology, but it's an encapsulation around a couple of subjects that are doing that as one of the independent subject pieces. What we're not talking about is that would be within the realm of all of your structure. So that's what this is showing that I put on the screen. Hopefully it's helping. That those pieces that are down there in those little pretty boxes are workflowed too, like Achieve and a lot of the other companies in the space are workflowed too, because you have this identity enhanced education. Am I saying that right, Gavin?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like your use of the analogy of Amazon, because I think it's probably lost on people outside of education, non-educators, if you will, the level of complexity that our districts have to deal with to deliver as personalized, if I can use that phrase, that word, a personalized experience as possible, and one that is responsive to the needs of the individual student. I mean, to a large degree, obviously we do that with IEPs and in special ed, right? But wouldn't it be a wonderful world if every student had some level of tailoring of their plan to them? That's somewhat of an impossibility if we approach it with a mindset like the historical models. But what you're bringing up, Lonnie, is if we thought like Amazon, what might that look like, right? And if we as consumers deal with Amazon, it's super simple, right? You just point and click or touch, right? Depending on your device. But they do deliver that simplicity to us because they manage complexity so well and in such an automated way. And that, I think, is the key to delivering the blended digital plus human touch approach to education at scale. And I emphasize that part, at scale. It requires mastery of complexity to a degree that maybe not like Amazon, because we're dealing at a district level, let's say, but it does require a different approach to the IT stack. And like I said, I think solving the data interoperability challenge and the identity side of it, those are two prerequisites to do that. And I know it probably seems almost too pie in the sky to think about technology in that vein, sort of the Amazon analogy, but there really are practical steps that can be taken in the short term that don't require a complete revolution of IT. And that's why, typically what I recommend to our customers who are thinking like this, how do I take incremental steps toward a greater vision? It is, things that are nearer term that actually deliver value to districts immediately, like what we call identity lifecycle management and provisioning starts to lay that foundation. It also kicks off a process to start working through data standards that overcome the obstacles that I mentioned earlier. And like I said, I think the key there is it starts to lay a foundation that bears fruit immediately. It's not like you're laying a foundation that doesn't really do anything for you until 8 other things are done.
Yeah, which scares off the small districts.
It makes it almost impractical to think this way.
Yeah, and I think, and we don't want to like freak people out and going, they're looking at this slide right now going, I'm freaked out, right? The truth is, it starts first with realizing you're executing learning for the learners directly. And then you're arraying your teaching behind this structure. Right now, 99% of the superintendents, I would say, out there, they think with, I go to a building or I run buildings all day and there's people in the buildings and they're in the walled off little classrooms. And they run it as a bureaucracy. They run it through the people. All we're asking right now is start this year thinking that you run an enterprise through technology. And then you array your people in the most artfully precise way to drive learning. This is a different way of thinking. Let's start right there, and then we'll take baby steps after that. So there's some other things that I think it would be important for you to bring up. Really, I think you talked a little bit about the vision of the future, but you also know really well the technology challenges because you guys work directly with so many states and individual districts. Can you sort of bullet those out and give us hints about how people get through them?
Yeah, so I think, so I mentioned a couple already in terms of interoperability and use of identity management. Those are definitely a couple. Another one is the migration to the cloud. That is, I think, for the most part, there's been a broad acceptance of that, but I still see, some districts lagging behind on that, which there are sometimes good reasons why certain things need to be outside the cloud, but it can certainly hold you back from a technology standpoint. If there isn't a broad migration in that way, and it actually becomes harder to scale. But the other one is actually, I don't know if this is going to be surprising or not, isn't really a technology obstacle. It's a human obstacle when the curriculum side of the house and the IT side of the house are not necessarily on the same page or collaborating with a common vision. I think that's actually the number one obstacle. Technology, often what I see gets, I think, and you somewhat mentioned this, Lonnie, that technology is not just adding technology doesn't solve anything. It actually makes things worse. Yeah. What I see from the most successful districts is really tight collaboration about the role of technology in overcoming some of the obstacles that we've talked about to deliver a learning experience that the students need. When that tight collaboration is there and there's not a competition for funds, there's not a competition for budget, but there's a common vision with clear roles on how the groups come together to deliver what the students need. Like that is what really makes every other obstacle something that can be overcome.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so really the work that we have to do is we have to get people to understand this is a structural shift. And humans are super important. Let's make them even more important. Let's wrap around them a much more sophisticated infrastructure. Let's let the tech do the work rather than be a burden. And unfortunately, with so many new schools and districts getting into the fray, there's a lot out there that are still like, I hope normal comes back. The problem is we don't think normal's coming back. We think that now the expectation of consumer level quality user interface, navigation, the whole experience is never going to go back to, please give me my worksheets, please lecture to me for another hour. I think that's done. So yeah, I want to check chat here for a second. Yeah. Okay. So I think, well, we're going to hear from Chris in a second, but I think we're at a point now. Chris McMurray just made a comment, but Chris, hold on. So we have we're looking at like identity infused education as giving you the concept to all the listeners out there right now, that there's this wraparound of the individual student that it sort of floats across all your systems and integrates and does something for you, rather than it's this monolithic name, birth date, enrollment status, and that feeds everything else only. Dr. Cheryl, I think you just made a comment. You want to unmute?
Good afternoon. I just wanted to say that I totally concur with the statement as far as sometimes IT and curriculum unintentionally can be at opposing of sorts when it comes to allocating the resources. So I was in a district for 18 years, and during that time I was a principal for 10 of the years, and I experienced that firsthand. Mm-hmm. So now being the superintendent of Sackatone Elementary School District, I did have the opportunity last year to morph our organizational chart, and that was one of the first changes I made. And so our IT manager reports to the CIA director, and they work in tandem just beautifully. And they're both seated at the table for all discussions, and it works. So I applaud that statement, and having lived through it, I would concur.
Yeah. What is your CIA office, or is it chief?
Yeah. So it's curriculum instruction and assessment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then with COVID-19 and going virtual, who would have known, right? But it was the perfect pairing.
Yeah. That's a huge step, and that's leadership today, right?
Yeah.
I know James Butler, who's going to join us later today from Tucson. He came to our Phoenix event. I remember one of the things, we caught him on video singing this at the end. Was it last year? He came on and he said, it's so great that we have the curriculum and the tech people in the same room today. Like, it is a big thing. It's like a surprisingly big thing in so many places. Hey, Matt, you want to make a comment on all this?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Am I on per se?
Yeah, you're on. We can see you even on video. Yay.
All right. How wonderful. So actually, Dr. Paul, I think that'd probably be Bob Cassidy, right? Out there at Somerton. I've known Bob for about 20 plus years at this point. I'm curious as to, in this particular vision, is IT subordinate to curriculum or is a peer per se? How do you see that?
Mm-hmm. It's right now, again, I love the realness of these conversations. In the ideal world, it is peer. Right now it's subordinate, and here's the disclaimer. He has some learning, so there's some learning gaps right now that need to take place, and the director of CIA is driving the vision and the mission forward, and clear understanding of what needs to be done. What our IT person is doing a beautiful job navigating through, but have to build that capability and capacity, right? Is he's learning to navigate through with being more of a support to the teachers, as opposed to just, if you will, through automaticity, doing things on their computer remotely, and taking over the image and handling it. What we're trying to drive is, we're going to get a lot further, especially in a rural district, if we support the teachers, right? Let's walk alongside them. Let's teach them how to problem solve, as opposed to just in the middle of the night, you're jumping on and correcting something, right? So it will over time, the ultimate vision, Matt, is certainly that they are peers, but with all transparency right now, just because of knowledge base, one does report more to the other.
Yeah, that's, see, ours, myself and the superintendent, or the assistant superintendent of curriculum instruction sit together at the same level. We both report to the superintendent, and this creates some delightful tension. I mean, she and I have also worked together for 20 years, so we're really used to each other in that way. So I'm always a little wary of, and I understand the desire to make IT aligned with curriculum and in tune with curriculum, but IT brings its own particular energy. Particularly since curriculum, forgive me, tends to be fairly insular. You know, curriculum, that's what they do, and that's how, whereas IT extends into every industry and into every sector of the economy. So we tend to come in with other ideas, so we can be an infusion of energy and knowledge into what can be a very, very sort of insular space. Now, it's on me as the IT guy to make sure I'm up in tune with that. But my challenge to my colleague, Debbie, the assistant superintendent, is I can go to an ASCD conference and I know what they're talking about. Can you go to one of my conferences and know what my world is talking about? And I think if each of those particular individuals can do that to some extent, then you have some really interesting energy that comes out of that.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the thing is, that's why we have the EduJedi dictionary. So give that to Debbie. But also know, Matt, you're smart. You do know, and not everyone in your shoes does know things. The problem with you is you're really smart and you know stuff. So let me just end up with Gavin here, and then we're going to bring on Chris and Matt and Cheryl. Stay on, because this is now going to move into the workshop about the new stuff coming out, so that the Debbies of the world can get on board, and more of a conversation there. Okay, so Gavin. Great conversation. I think there's so much more to be done, and we're going to help you as the Learning Council to introduce identity infused education. I think this is huge.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Appreciate the time and attention, guys. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
Bye, guys.